If you're sick of writing chord progressions with the same 4, 5, or 6 chords, one of the quickest ways to break outside of that box is to learn your secondary dominant chords. In this video, what I want to do is go over the concept of what is the dominant chord, what are our secondary dominant chords, and then really focus on how can we write music using these, where have we seen them before in actual music, all that kind of good stuff. Now, this video won't make a lot of sense unless you really understand building a major scale and building the diatonic chords of the major scale. So if you're not familiar with that concept, please check out the video I did on writing major chord progressions. I've linked to it in the description. I want to get started though by understanding the concept of the dominant chord. So here's the deal. Let's pick any major chord or minor chord. I'm going to pick G major, all right? So here's a pretty little G major. And the dominant chord is the chord that will take me to G major. There's a chord out there that when you play it, your ear is just going to be praying to come back to G major. And that's the dominant chord. I can find it just by counting up a perfect fifth. That's like 5 notes of my major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's also 7 frets away. And it takes me to the note D. And then once I find that note, I just build a 7th chord on top of it. So D7. All right. This is the chord that will take us to G major. Listen to how strong of a landing, how definite of a resolution it was when we got back to G. There's no mistaking it. G is our home. G is our tonic. G has been tonicized. That's the word I'm going to be using quite a bit in this video. So very simple. You want to find the dominant chord of a major chord, just go up a fifth, play a 7th chord. And here's the great thing. This also works with minor chords as well. So G minor. You want to find the dominant chord of G minor? Easy. Go up a fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Give it a 7th chord. D7. And listen as it comes back to G minor. Very strong resolution right there. So really all you have to keep in mind is that dominant chords will pull you back to a tonic, all right? And they're easy to find. You go up a fifth, you build a 7th chord for them. This works for major chords or minor chords. Now, if that makes sense to you, all we have to do is apply that concept to every single chord in my key. So let's figure out the key of G, all right? Key of G has a G major chord, an A minor, a B minor, a C, a D, an E minor, an F sharp diminished, and a G major, all right? So I've got all those 7 chords. I can build a dominant chord off of all these different chords. Like I had an A minor in there. What's the dominant chord of A minor? Well, go up a fifth, make it a 7th chord. That would be up a fifth is E, and the 7th chord is E7. So I can build the dominant chord of my 2nd chord. We would call that the 5 of 2, the dominant chord of my 2nd chord, and that would be an E7. E7 would take me to A minor, even though I'm in the key of G. So how can I use that chord right there? Well, let's just play a G major chord, and let's just bring in that E7. And you see, it sounds all right. It does want to come back to that A minor, and maybe let's just end with my normal dominant chord. D7 is the dominant chord in the key of G. So now I've got G, E7, A minor to D7. And that sounds good. Really, really nice, interesting chord. You can hear how much color pops up with that E7. We've all of a sudden got a note in there that is not in the key of G. Specifically, with this E7, we're bringing in a G sharp. And you're not allowed to play a G sharp in the key of G. So anytime you're introducing one of these secondary dominant chords, you're going to be introducing a non-diatonic note. And you're going to have to accommodate that. I'll talk about that a little bit at the very end of the video. We can also hear this 5 of 2 change in the song Let It Snow. That song is in the key of C. We go from a 1 to a 5, and then from our 2 to our 5. Then all of a sudden it goes from our 2 chord to our dominant chord of the 2, and then finally back to our dominant chord to our tonic. So we've got all the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. Then right here, and when there's really no place to go. Hear how nice of a change that is. A lot of tension in the middle of my verse right there. That A7 pulls me so strongly back to D minor that it's almost like temporarily we're in the key of D minor. If you picked up the song right there, if you started playing it from right there, that's pretty clearly the key of D minor with the dominant chord in there. So, you know, it's interesting to think of these secondary dominant changes as little tiny modulations. You don't have to think of them that way, but I really like to think that these are temporary modulations into a new key, and that helps you accommodate that part later on down the line. Now, also with this song, at the very, very end of it, I like to close it off with that 5 of 2 again, but with a little bit different of a context. You've got let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. And then bringing in that A7 again really cues you off to hear that again. Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. So that 5 of 2 to me is a really funny jazz hands, you know, shows over kind of chord. I really have a very distinct identity of it, and hopefully you'll hear that it's got kind of a ritzy kind of sound to it. So let's go back to the key of G for a little bit here, and I want to look at my 1 chord to my 4 chord to my 1 chord, and that 4 chord specifically, if I want to get to my 4 chord, I'd have to play a G7, but I'm starting here on a G major, right? And G7 is not in the key of G major. If I do it anyways, though, listen to how strong it's going to pull to that 4 chord, which once I've got there, I could do all sorts of stuff. I could borrow the 4 chord and then come back to my tonic. So really nice change is that 7th chord built off of my tonic because it takes me to my 4 chord. Great example of this is Hey Jude. Hey Jude is in the key of F. We've got my 1 chord, my 5 chord is C. Stay on the 5 chord, make it a C7, that's just my natural dominant chord. Back to F. Here's my 4 chord, B flat, minute. You let her into your heart. 5 chord, then you can start. Now check it out, I'm gonna come back to my tonic, F, but then I make that F and F7, because that's really gonna warm us up and get us ready for Hey Jude, refrain. Really nice change, just collapsing into our 4 chord right there. Tonicizes the 4 very well to the point where it really feels like you're in the key of B flat major there for a little bit. But you're not, you're in the key of F. They just play a really great trick on you. Now, what about my 5 of 5? So I'm in the key of G, my 5th chord is D, and what's the dominant chord of D? Well, that's A7. So if I wanted to play an A7, that would take me to a D, which would then resolve me to G. And I'll actually play it as a D7. That way I've got my dominant, the secondary dominant of my dominant, then I've got my dominant, then I got my tonic. So A7, D7 to G. And do you hear that chromatic movement there? I've got a C sharp right here on my 2nd string. And then on a D7, there's a natural C. And then on G major, there's just that natural B. So bum, bum, bum. Nice little natural chromatic descent to help us resolve there. We hear this exact same change at the end of Kokomo by the Beach Boys, which is a perfect chord progression. It's in the key of C, all right? So here's my 4 chord in the key of C, here's my borrowed 4 chord, here's my tonic. Then D7 is the 5 of 5, takes me to my natural 5, and then back to my tonic. Awesome chord progression. Now, the most common secondary dominant chord that we hear is the 5 of 6. This might be one of the most overused chords in history. If I'm in the key of G, my 6th chord is E minor. And if I want to get to E minor, I would play a B7 first. So you can hear how nice, even if I just went from G major, play that secondary dominant chord right off the bat, it's going to take you to E minor, and then I can follow up with pretty much anything. So great progression right out the door just by sneaking in that 5 of 6 and following it up with the 6. What's weird about that one is a lot of times people will use that secondary dominant, that 5 of 6, and they won't even follow it up with a 6. For example, the song Creep by Radiohead is in E major. We've got our 1 chord, and our 3 chord would normally be G sharp minor. In this case, it's G sharp major, which is the dominant chord of C sharp minor. So this is the 5 of 6, but they don't give you the 6. They give you the 4 instead. So following up the secondary dominant chord with the wrong chord, little surprising from the traditional point of view, but I think it works just fine. We hear this a lot. Also in the song F You by CeeLo Green, it's in the key of C major. We've got our 1 chord. We've got our 5 of 5, which you would expect us to take to the 5 chord. But no, they take you to the 4 chord instead. All right, so C major, D7, F major, C major. Awesome little chord progression. Just a few months back, I finished a country track that uses this exact same chord progression. We've got a 1 to our 5 of 6, and then it takes us straight to our 4, and then our 5 instead.
If only someone taught you that every girl don't need your rescue, then maybe we might get along. Whoa, you're just
Now, Now, before we wrap things up, there's a few things I want to talk about here. When you introduce one of these chords, you're introducing a note that is outside of the key, and you usually have to do a little work to make sure that whatever you're singing or whatever you're playing lead guitar on is going to accommodate that new note. So here's my suggestion, because this is a very deep topic and we can spend a lot of time talking about this. When that 7th chord comes up, keep in mind it's only 4 notes. It's a root, a third, a fifth, and a flat 7. And there's a lot of scales that contain those notes. So I would say pick a scale that contains those 4 notes, try playing it on top of that chord and see if you like the way it sounds. Your primary candidates would be the Mixolydian scale. That's got all those notes in it. Also, the Phrygian dominant scale has all those notes in it, but you would be working off of that mainly if you're resolving to a minor chord. So for example, if I'm going from the 5 of to the 2, then I would think about using the Phrygian dominant scale on that first chord to accommodate both the chords. Also, I have no problem just dropping the 7th completely. You know, the 7th chords can get a little old-timey and a little not so modern sounding sometimes. So we do hear these same kind of ideas just without the 7th, just using it as a major chord instead. And one last thing, the reason I didn't give you a dominant chord off my 7 chord is because no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to resolve to a diminished triad. You can't really tonicize it. So you could build a 7th chord off the 5th there and call it 5 of 7, and that's been done before. It just doesn't function like these other ones do. So once again, diminished is the cause of the odd man out in these cases. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something, and I hope you've expanded your chord vocabulary a little bit. If you really like this video, you can consider supporting my Patreon page. Really, these lessons wouldn't exist if it weren't for the fine folks over there who are donating to support these lessons. And if you can't do that, that's totally fine. You can just like, comment, subscribe. All that kind of stuff helps me out. So thanks for watching.